In 40 years on this bench, no one has ever spoken to me the way Preston Montgomery Force spoke to me that Tuesday morning. No one. I've heard excuses. I've heard lies. I've heard people try to talk their way out of serious charges with charm or tears or anger. But what Preston said to me that October morning at 10 a.m. in Providence Municipal Court went beyond anything I'd ever experienced. He looked at me, this 24-year-old who had never worked a day in his life, heir to the Montgomery Hotel Group, a $2.3 billion empire, and he said, "Your Honor, with all due respect, you're a traffic court judge in Providence, Rhode Island. You're nothing. My father has had breakfast with 3 presidents. You think this little courtroom scares me?" He actually laughed in my face, in my courtroom. His attorney, Harrison Blackwell, former state attorney general and now lead counsel for the Montgomery family, tried to stop him. I saw Blackwell reach out, touch Preston's arm, whisper something urgent, but Preston shrugged him off like he was swatting a fly. His father, Preston Montgomery III, was sitting in the front row, and I watched him close his eyes like he knew exactly what was coming, like he'd seen this pattern before and understood there was no stopping it now. But the son couldn't help himself. He'd spent 24 years being told he was untouchable, that the Montgomery name meant something, that money could solve any problem, and he believed it with every fiber of his being. "My family has donated more money to this state than your entire courthouse is worth," Preston continued, gesturing around the courtroom like he owned it. "So why don't we skip the theatrics? You give me whatever fine you're going to give me, and I'll have my accountant wire it before lunch. We done here?" The courtroom was dead silent. Every person in that room, from the court reporter to the bailiff to the gallery filled with people waiting for their own hearings, was watching me, waiting to see how I would respond to being called nothing by a billionaire's heir, waiting to see if money really could buy anything, even contempt for the judicial system. What I did over the next 38 minutes didn't just send Preston Montgomery IV to prison. It triggered a clause in the Montgomery Hotel Group's corporate charter that forced his father to step down as CEO. It ended a family legacy that took 3 generations to build. And it proves something I've always believed. The bigger they think they are, the harder they fall. If you've ever watched someone with money talk down to people like they're worthless, if you've ever wanted to see a billionaire's son learn that his daddy's money means nothing in a court of law, subscribe right now, because I'm about to destroy Preston Montgomery IV so completely that his own family will never recover. Let me take you back to where this all started. Saturday night, July 27th, 11:47 p.m., at the Providence Biltmore Hotel on Doran Street. The Biltmore is the flagship property of the Montgomery Hotel Group, the crown jewel that Preston Montgomery III bought back in 1989 when he was just starting out. It's where the family story began. And it's where, 35 years later, that same family's legacy would start to crumble. Preston IV arrived that night for a private party in the penthouse, some friend's birthday celebration, the kind of event where champagne costs more per bottle than most people make in a week. He was driving his Lamborghini Huracan Evo, Verde Mantis Green, Rhode Island plate PMG IV, worth $287,000. At 9:15 p.m., he pulled up to the valet stand and tossed his keys to the attendant on duty. That attendant was Marcus Thompson. Marcus took the keys, gave Preston a claim ticket, and drove the Lamborghini carefully into the hotel's secure parking garage. The security cameras captured every second of it. Marcus parking the car with precision, checking the mirrors, making sure there was plenty of space on both sides. Perfect execution. The kind of care you'd expect from someone who takes pride in his work, no matter what that work is. Preston went upstairs to his party. Marcus continued his shift, parking cars, retrieving cars, doing the job he'd been doing 6 nights a week for the past 2 years. At 11:45 p.m., Preston came back down. He was drunk, not falling down drunk, but enough that his movements were looser, his voice louder. He handed Marcus the claim ticket and told him to hurry up. Marcus jogged to the garage, retrieved the Lamborghini, and pulled it up to the front entrance at 11:47 p.m. Preston walked around the car, inspecting it like he was looking for something. And then he found it, or claimed to. "A scratch," he said, On the passenger door. Right there, about halfway down. You scratched my car, Preston said. Marcus apologized immediately, said he hadn't noticed any scratch, asked if he could take a look. Preston didn't want to look together. He wanted someone to blame. You worthless piece of trash, Preston said, loud enough that other valets turned to look. Do you know how much this car costs? More than your life is worth. Marcus tried to de-escalate. He apologized again. He offered to get the manager to file an incident report, to contact the hotel's insurance. But Preston wasn't interested in procedures or protocols. He was interested in making someone pay for disrespecting his property, so he punched Marcus in the face. One solid punch, right to the jaw, and Marcus went down hard on the concrete driveway. And that's when it got worse. Because Preston didn't stop. He kicked Marcus while he was down. 7 times, the security cameras captured all of it. 7 kicks to a man lying on the ground, trying to protect his head, unable to defend himself. Preston kicked him in the ribs, in the back, in the face. He kicked him like he was trying to break something inside him. Other valets ran over, tried to pull Preston away. Preston threatened them too, told them they'd be next if they touched him. Hotel security arrived after about 2 minutes, which felt like an eternity to Marcus lying there bleeding on the ground. They finally pulled Preston back, and someone called 911. The ambulance arrived at 11:58 p.m. Marcus was unconscious by then, his face covered in blood, his breathing shallow. They rushed him to Rhode Island Hospital. The diagnosis: broken jaw, fractured orbital bone around his left eye, 3 broken ribs, severe concussion, lacerations across his face and torso. He looked like he'd been in a car accident, but this wasn't an accident. This was a beating, a deliberate, sustained assault on a man whose only crime was doing his job. Here's what makes this even more sickening. There was no scratch. The forensic examination done later showed that Preston's Lamborghini was in perfect condition, not a mark on it. Preston either imagined the scratch in his drunken state or made it up as an excuse to unleash his anger on someone he considered beneath him.
There are moments in 40 years on this bench that stay with you forever. Moments that make you question whether we're raising a generation that confuses intelligence with arrogance, education with wisdom, vocabulary with character. Let me tell you about one of those moments, about a young woman who walked into my courtroom convinced that knowing the law meant she was above it, who thought legal terminology was a shield against accountability, who believed her father's reputation as a prominent attorney made her untouchable. Her name was Alexandra Morrison, 24 years old, recent law school graduate, daughter of Rhode Island defense attorney Jonathan Morrison, and she was about to learn that in my courtroom, it doesn't matter how many Latin phrases you know, or how eloquently you can cite case law. What matters is whether you took responsibility when you hurt someone. The file landed on my desk on a Tuesday. Alexandra Catherine Morrison, reckless driving causing injury, leaving the scene of an accident. There are moments in 40 years on this bench that stay with you forever. Moments that make you question whether we're raising a generation that confuses intelligence with arrogance, education with wisdom, vocabulary with character. Let me tell you about one of those moments, about a young woman who walked into my courtroom convinced that knowing the law meant she was above it, who thought legal terminology was a shield against accountability, who believed her father's reputation as a prominent attorney made her untouchable. Her name was Alexandra Morrison,
Then, in March
24 years old, recent law school graduate, daughter of Rhode Island defense attorney Jonathan Morrison, and she was about to learn that in my courtroom, it doesn't matter how many Latin phrases you know or how eloquently you can cite case law. What matters is whether you took responsibility when you hurt someone. The file landed on my desk on a Tuesday. Alexandra Catherine Morrison, reckless driving causing injury, leaving the scene of an accident. There are moments in 40 years on this bench that stay with you forever. Moments that make you question whether we're raising a generation that confuses intelligence with arrogance, education with wisdom, vocabulary with character. Let me tell you about one of those moments, about a young woman who walked into my courtroom convinced that knowing the law meant she was above it, who thought legal terminology was a shield.
$11 an hour plus tips, 16-hour days, 6 days a week, 4 to 5 hours of sleep per night. He did this so Maya and Mia could have a normal childhood, so they could stay in their apartment, so they could go to the same school, so they wouldn't have to feel like everything had fallen apart just because their mother died. Marcus still wears his wedding ring. He keeps Angela's photo in his wallet. His daughters are his entire world. And on July 27th, Preston Montgomery IV nearly destroyed that world because of a scratch that didn't exist. After the assault, Marcus was hospitalized for 12 days. His jaw was wired shut for 8 weeks. He couldn't eat solid food, could barely speak. The fractured orbital bone around his eye required surgery. The broken ribs made it impossible to lift anything, which meant he couldn't do his warehouse job. He couldn't work as a valet either, couldn't stand for long periods, couldn't move quickly. Both jobs gone, both sources of income eliminated. And on top of Angela's medical debt, Marcus now had $89,000 in new medical bills from his own treatment. He went from working 16-hour days to lying in bed, unable to support his daughters, unable to explain to them why the bad man hurt Daddy, unable to promise them that everything would be okay because he honestly didn't know if it would be. This man served 2 tours protecting people like Preston Montgomery IV. He came home. His wife died of cancer. He worked 16-hour days to raise his twin daughters, and Preston Montgomery beat him for doing his job. Share this video right now, because Marcus Thompson deserves to be seen. Now let me tell you about the cover-up, because that's when the Montgomery family showed exactly who they are. Within an hour of Preston being pulled away from Marcus, hotel security was already working to make the evidence disappear. See, the Biltmore is owned by the Montgomery family. The security staff answers to them. And someone high up, we never found out exactly who, gave the order to delete the surveillance footage from the valet area. They went into the security office and started wiping the files, just erasing the assault like it never happened. But here's where they made their mistake. There was another valet working that night, a young woman named Destiny Williams, and she knew something was wrong when she saw security rushing to the monitors. So before they could delete everything, Destiny pulled out her phone and recorded the footage directly off the security screens. She saved it to the cloud. When security announced that there had been a technical malfunction and the footage was corrupted, Destiny kept quiet. She waited, and when the police came to investigate, she gave them everything. That video is the only reason we have a record of what Preston did that night. Destiny saved Marcus's case. She's a hero in this story too. But the Montgomery family wasn't done trying to make this go away. 3 days after the assault, while Marcus was still in the hospital, Preston's personal assistant showed up at his room. She was very polite, very professional. She said the Montgomery family was deeply sorry about the incident. She said they wanted to make things right, and then she offered Marcus $50,000 in cash to drop the charges and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Marcus, speaking with a wired jaw, could barely get the words out, but he refused. The assistant left. 2 days later, she came back. The offer was now $500,000. That's $500,000. Enough to pay off Angela's medical debt, enough to pay off his own medical bills, enough to maybe even take a few months off work to heal properly. Marcus refused again. The assistant looked genuinely confused. She couldn't understand why someone in Marcus's position would turn down that kind of money. She asked him to think about his daughters, to think about their future. Marcus said he was thinking about his daughters. He said, "My daughters are watching. What do I tell them, that Daddy took money from the man who beat him?" 1 week later, a lawyer from the Montgomery family's firm contacted Marcus with a final offer, $2 million. $2 million. In cash. All he had to do was sign a statement saying the assault was a mutual altercation, a misunderstanding that got out of hand, and agree never to speak about it publicly. The lawyer explained that this was more money than Marcus would ever see in his lifetime, that he could give his daughters a college education, a better life, financial security. Marcus said no. He said some things matter more than money. He said dignity matters, justice matters. The lawyer asked if he understood what he was giving up. Marcus said he understood perfectly. He understood that if he took that money, He'd be telling his daughters that being beaten was acceptable as long as the check cleared. He'd be telling them that powerful people can do whatever they want to regular people and just buy their silence. He'd be teaching them that their father's dignity was for sale. "I won't do that to Maya and Mia," Marcus told the lawyer. "They lost their mother. They're not going to lose their father's integrity too." They offered him $2 million to make it go away. And Marcus said no. He said his daughters were watching. He said dignity matters more than money. If you believe Marcus Thompson is a hero, subscribe and share this immediately. While Marcus was refusing bribes, the Montgomery family was working every other angle they had. Preston Montgomery III, the father, personally called the district attorney's office. Now, the DA had received campaign contributions from the Montgomery family over the years, significant contributions. But to her credit, she immediately recused herself from the case and appointed a special prosecutor to handle it. The family hired a team of 7 attorneys, led by Harrison Blackwell, who'd been Rhode Island's Attorney General from 2006 to 2010. Blackwell's firm, one of the most prestigious in New England, filed 14 separate motions before the trial even started. Motion to dismiss based on insufficient evidence, even though we had video. Motion to suppress that video, claiming it was obtained improperly, even though Destiny had every right to record what she saw. Motion for change of venue, claiming Preston couldn't get a fair trial in Providence because of the family's prominence. Motion to exclude Marcus's military service from testimony, claiming it was prejudicial. Motion after motion after motion, every single one denied. The evidence was too strong. The case was too clear, and Preston's own actions kept making things worse. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution presented the video footage, medical records, testimony from the other valets who witnessed the assault, forensic evidence showing there was no scratch on Preston's Lamborghini. It was an airtight case. But on the 3rd day, something happened that changed everything. Marcus took the stand. He wheeled himself up to the witness box because he was still in a wheelchair at that point, still recovering, still in pain every time he moved. His jaw had been unwired by then, but his face was still visibly swollen, his left eye still surrounded by purple and yellow bruising. He raised his right hand, took the oath, and began to tell his story in a quiet, steady voice. He talked about his daughters, about how Maya and Mia ask him every day when his face will look normal again, about how they ask if he can pick them up yet, and he has to say no because his ribs are still healing, about how they ask if the bad man who hurt Daddy is going to come hurt them too, and he tries to reassure them, but he can see the fear in their eyes, about how they've started having nightmares, waking up crying, and he can't comfort them the way he used to because it hurts too much to lift them. Marcus was explaining all of this, his voice cracking with emotion, tears running down his face, when I looked over at Preston. And Preston rolled his eyes, actually rolled his eyes like he was bored, like this testimony from the man he'd beaten was some kind of tedious performance. Then he leaned over to Harrison Blackwell and whispered something. But he whispered it loud enough that several people in the front row heard it. "He's milking it." I stopped the testimony. I said, "Mr. Montgomery, do you have something you'd like to share with the court?" Preston sat up straight, tried to look innocent. "No, Your Honor," I said, "because it appeared you were dismissive of Mr. Thompson's testimony just now." Blackwell stood up immediately. "Your Honor, my client was simply conferring with counsel." But Preston, and this is where his arrogance became his undoing, couldn't leave it alone. He said, "Your Honor, I just think we all know he's exaggerating for sympathy. It was a fight. People get in fights. He'll heal. A fight. He called what he did a fight. Like Marcus had any chance to fight back while being kicked on the ground." I looked at Marcus, still in the witness box, staring at Preston with this expression of complete disbelief. And I said, "Mr. Montgomery, you broke this man's jaw. You fractured his orbital bone. You gave him a concussion. You broke 3 of his ribs. That's not a fight. That's a beating. And if you interrupt these proceedings again with your commentary, you'll be held in contempt. Do you understand?" Preston smirked, actually smirked at me, and he said, "Respect? For a valet? Your Honor, he parks cars for a living. He should have been more careful with a $300,000 vehicle. That's when I knew exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't just arrogance. This wasn't just privilege. This was a complete absence of empathy, a fundamental belief that some people matter and some people don't, and the difference is determined by bank account balances. Preston Montgomery IV genuinely believed that Marcus Thompson's life was worth less than his car, and he believed that his money gave him the right to punish people he deemed inferior. The jury convicted him on all charges: assault causing serious bodily injury, a felony; battery, a felony; witness intimidation through the bribery attempts, a felony; making false statements about the scratch on his car, all guilty. The trial moved to sentencing. That's when Preston gave the speech that sealed not just his fate, but his entire family's legacy. I asked Preston if he had anything to say before I pronounced sentence. This is standard procedure, giving the defendant one last chance to show remorse, to apologize, to demonstrate that they understand the severity of what they've done. Most people take this opportunity to express regret, to ask for leniency, to show the court they've learned something. Preston stood up. He buttoned his custom Brioni suit jacket, the one that cost $7,800. He adjusted his Patek Philippe watch, worth $125,000, and he looked directly at me with that same smirk he'd worn throughout the trial. "Your Honor," he began, "with all due respect, you're a traffic court judge in Providence, Rhode Island. You're nothing." I heard someone gasp in the gallery. Harrison Blackwell grabbed Preston's arm, tried to pull him back down to his seat. Preston shrugged him off. "My father has had breakfast with 3 presidents," Preston continued. "We've donated millions to this state. We employ thousands of people. My family has built an empire that actually matters. You think this little courtroom scares me? You think anything you say here today will actually affect my life?" He gestured around the courtroom like it was beneath him. "My family has donated more money to this state than your entire courthouse is worth," he said. "So why don't we skip the theatrics? You give me whatever fine you're going to give me, and I'll have my accountant wire it before lunch. We done here?" The courtroom was silent. Preston's father had his head in his hands. Blackwell was whispering urgently to Preston, but Preston wasn't listening. He was staring at me, waiting for my response, absolutely certain that he'd just won some kind of victory by putting me in my place. I let the silence hang there for a long moment. Sometimes the best thing you can do as a judge is let someone finish digging their own grave. Then I spoke, slowly and clearly, so every word would land. "Mr. Montgomery, are you finished?" He shrugged. "Unless you have something more important to say than what's in that file." I said, "Oh, I have quite a bit more to say. And by the time I'm done, you're going to wish you'd shown this court, and that veteran you beat, just a fraction of the respect your father apparently forgot to teach you." He looked at me and called me nothing. He said his family has donated more than my courthouse is worth. He told me to give him a fine and move on. In 32 years, no one has ever spoken to me like that. Stay with me, because what I do next will destroy his entire world. I continued, and I made sure my voice carried to every corner of that courtroom. "Mr. Montgomery, you just called me nothing. You said your family's donations make this court irrelevant. You suggested I should just take your money and let you go. Let me tell you something about this courtroom." I paused, letting the weight of what I was about to say settle in. "For 32 years, I have sat in this chair. I've sentenced drug dealers and drunk drivers. I've sentenced thieves and con artists. I've sentenced people who had nothing and people who had everything. And you know what I've learned?" Preston was still standing, but the smirk was starting to fade. "Money doesn't make you a good person. Power doesn't make you worthy of respect. A title or a trust fund or a family name doesn't give you the right to treat other people like they're worthless. The measure of a man isn't what he has. It's how he treats people who have less." I looked directly at Preston, holding his gaze. "You had everything, Mr. Montgomery. You were born into wealth that most people can't even imagine. You had opportunities that 99% of this country will never see. You had every advantage. And what did you do with it?" I let the question hang there. "You beat a veteran, a widower, A father who works 2 jobs to raise his daughters. You beat him over a scratch that didn't exist. You kicked him while he was on the ground. You called him worthless trash. And then you tried to buy his silence. When that didn't work, your family tried to make the evidence disappear. When that didn't work, you came into this courtroom and mocked him for being emotional about his own assault. Preston opened his mouth to say something, but I kept going. And just now, when given the opportunity to show remorse, to apologize, to demonstrate even the smallest amount of human decency, you chose instead to insult this court, to call me nothing, to suggest that your father's wealth puts you above the law. I leaned forward. But here's what you need to understand, Mr. Montgomery. In this courtroom, you're not Preston Montgomery IV, heir to a billion-dollar empire. You're not the vice president of brand development or whatever title your father gave you to make you feel important. You're just a man who assaulted another man. A man who showed no mercy, no remorse, no respect for anyone but himself. And your father's money doesn't reach this bench. Your family name doesn't impress me. And your contempt for this court just made your situation much, much worse. Your father's money doesn't reach this bench. Your family name doesn't impress me. And your contempt for this court just made your situation much worse. If you believe judges should stand up to billionaires, keep watching. I picked up the sentencing document I'd prepared. Preston Harrison Montgomery IV, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers on 5 counts. For assault causing serious bodily injury, I sentence you to 2 years in the Rhode Island Adult Correctional Institutions. For battery, 6 months consecutive. For witness intimidation through bribery, 6 months consecutive. For contempt of court, 30 days consecutive. That's a total of 3 years in state prison. Preston's face went white. 3 years was the maximum sentence allowable for these charges. Blackwell was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, we would request that Mr. Montgomery be allowed to serve his sentence at a minimum security facility, given his lack of criminal history, and I cut him off. Mr. Montgomery will serve his sentence in general population at the ACI. No special accommodations, no work release, no early release. He will serve every day of this sentence. I continued reading. Additionally, Mr. Montgomery is ordered to pay $750,000 in restitution to Marcus Thompson, covering medical expenses, lost wages, and compensation for pain and suffering. He will pay a $100,000 fine to this court. Upon his release, he will complete 1,000 hours of community service at a veterans' homeless shelter, so he can perhaps learn something about the people he claims to be superior to. He will have no contact with Marcus Thompson or his family for the rest of his life, and he will publish a written apology in the Providence Journal, the Boston Globe, and the New York Times, taking full responsibility for his actions. Preston was gripping the table in front of him, his knuckles white. But I wasn't done. There's one more thing, Mr. Montgomery. Something I discovered during my review of this case, specifically during my examination of the Montgomery Hotel Group's corporate structure. Preston looked confused. So did his father. Are you familiar with Article 7, Section 3 of the Montgomery Hotel Group corporate charter? Preston stammered. What? I don't. It's called the Moral Turpitude Clause, I explained. It was inserted by your grandfather's original investors back in 1995 to protect the company from scandal. Let me read it to you. I pulled out a copy of the corporate charter. If any immediate family member of the chief executive officer is convicted of a felony involving violence, moral turpitude, or conduct bringing disrepute to the company, the CEO shall resign within 30 days, and the board of directors shall convene to elect new leadership. The courtroom was dead silent. Everyone was starting to understand what this meant. Your father, Preston Montgomery III, has served as CEO of the Montgomery Hotel Group for 35 years. He built that company from one hotel into 47 properties across 12 states. A $4.8 billion enterprise, 4,700 employees. A family legacy that spans 3 generations. I looked at Preston, whose face had gone from white to gray. And you just destroyed it. Because you couldn't control your temper with a valet. Because you had to mock this court. Because you believed your money made you untouchable. Preston's voice cracked. Wait, what? No. That's not. He spun to look at his father. Dad? Dad? Preston Montgomery III was sitting in the front row where he'd been throughout the entire trial. For the first time, he looked up. But he didn't look at his son. He was staring at me, and in his eyes I saw the recognition of what had just happened. 35 years of work, gone. Not because of anything he'd done, but because of his son's actions on one night in July. Your Honor, please, Preston IV said, his voice rising with panic. Please, I didn't mean what I said. I was arrogant. I was stupid. I was showing off. I said quietly. 10 minutes ago I was nothing. Now you're apologizing? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. His voice was breaking now, tears starting to stream down his face. I can't do this to my father. I can't destroy everything he built. This isn't fair to him. He didn't do anything wrong. You're absolutely right, I said. Your father didn't do anything wrong. But you did. And you should have thought about your father's legacy before you beat a veteran over an imaginary scratch. You should have thought about it before you offered that veteran $2 million to stay quiet. You should have thought about it before you rolled your eyes at his testimony and called him a valet like that somehow made him less human than you. I looked at Preston Montgomery III, who was still staring straight ahead, and most of all, Mr. Montgomery, you should have thought about your father before you looked at me and called me nothing. Before you suggested that your family's money puts you above this court. Before you made it clear that you have no respect for the judicial system, for the law, or for anyone who isn't part of your privileged world. I turned back to Preston IV. But you didn't think about any of that. Because in 24 years, no one ever taught you that actions have consequences. Your father's money always bailed you out. The assault charge at Princeton that disappeared, your father paid for that. The DUI in Newport that got dropped, your father made some calls. The harassment complaint from the hotel employee, your father wrote a check and she went away. Every single time you've done something terrible, your father's money has protected you from facing any real consequences. I leaned forward. But not today. Today you learn that there are some things money can't buy. And one of them is immunity from the law when you beat a man half to death and then mock the court that's trying to deliver justice. His father built an empire over 35 years. His son destroyed it in one night. The sentence I just handed down will cost the Montgomery family $800 million and end their legacy forever. Share this with everyone who needs to see that actions have consequences, even for billionaires. Preston was fully breaking down now. Please, I'll do anything. I'll apologize. I'll pay whatever you want. I'll go to therapy. I'll do community service. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. Just please don't do this to my father. The arrogance that had filled this courtroom for days had evaporated completely. This wasn't the confident heir anymore. This was a terrified child realizing he'd broken something irreplaceable. The sentence stands, I said. Bailiff, take Mr. Montgomery into custody. As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Preston turned to his father one more time. Dad, I'm sorry. Dad, please forgive me. Dad, I'm so sorry. Tell them I didn't mean it. Tell them Preston Montgomery III finally looked at his son, and he just shook his head. That's all. Just a slow shake of his head, his jaw clenched, his eyes filled with something between anger and grief. And Preston broke down completely. He was sobbing as they put the handcuffs on him, sobbing as they led him toward the door that would take him to processing and then to prison. I'm sorry, he shouted. I'm so sorry. But his father had already stood up and was walking out of the courtroom, not looking back. Before the bailiff could lead Preston away completely, I asked Marcus if he wanted to make a statement. Marcus wheeled himself forward from where he'd been sitting in the front row. He still couldn't walk without pain, still needed the wheelchair for longer distances. His face still bore the marks of the assault, the surgery scars near his eye, the slightly crooked way his jaw sat from the break. He positioned himself where he could see both Preston in handcuffs and me on the bench. Your Honor, Marcus began, his voice quiet but steady, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I was deployed when I was barely out of high school. I saw things no one should have to see. I did things to protect this country that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And I came home believing that service meant something, that protecting people mattered. He paused, gathering his thoughts. My wife died 3 years ago. Breast cancer. She was 31. I held her hand while she took her last breath. I had to explain to my 7-year-old daughters why Mommy wasn't coming home. I worked 2 jobs, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, because I want Maya and Mia to have the childhood their mother and I dreamed of giving them. Marcus looked at Preston, who couldn't meet his eyes. I work as a valet. I park cars. That's what I do. And I do it with pride because it helps me provide for my family. But to you, Mr. Montgomery, that made me worthless. That made me trash. That made me someone you could beat because you were having a bad night and needed someone to blame. His voice got stronger. You beat me because you thought I scratched your car. I didn't. But even if I had, is that worth breaking a man's face? Is an accidental scratch on a car worth putting a father in the hospital? Worth taking away his ability to work? Worth giving his daughters nightmares? Marcus looked at me. Your Honor, when Mr. Montgomery's family offered me money to make this go away, my daughters asked me what I was going to do. They're 7 years old. They don't understand court systems or legal proceedings, but they understand right and wrong. And I couldn't look at them and take that money. I couldn't teach them that dignity has a price. That being beaten is acceptable if the check is big enough. He turned back to Preston. I don't feel sorry for you, Mr. Montgomery. I can't. You had everything, and you used it to become a bully. You beat people who couldn't fight back and then hid behind your father's money. But I feel sorry for your father. I really do. Because he built something, and you destroyed it. He worked for 35 years, and you ended it in one night. That must be a terrible thing to carry. Marcus wheeled himself back to his seat. Preston was still crying, but now it was silent, the kind of crying that comes from complete despair. The bailiff led him out. Preston Montgomery III had already left. The courtroom slowly emptied, and I sat there thinking about what had just happened, about how one man's arrogance had destroyed so much more than just his own future. Over the following weeks and months, the full consequences of that sentencing played out. Preston Montgomery III formally resigned as CEO of the Montgomery Hotel Group on November 15th, 30 days after his son's conviction, as required by the corporate charter. The board of directors convened immediately. Without Preston III's leadership, and with a scandal hanging over the company, the board voted to explore a sale. They couldn't risk keeping the Montgomery name attached to the hotels anymore. Not with the media coverage of Preston Force's assault and imprisonment, not with the public outcry over the bribery attempts and the cover-up. Within 3 months, Marriott International had acquired the Montgomery Hotel Group for less than the company was worth. The Montgomery family, which had held a 34% controlling stake, received approximately $780 million. That sounds like a lot until you realize their stake had been valued at over $1.6 billion just a year earlier. They lost $800 million in value. The Providence Biltmore, the flagship property where this all began, was rebranded. The Montgomery name was removed from every single hotel. 47 properties that had carried that family name, that represented 3 generations of work, were now just part of a larger corporate portfolio. Preston Montgomery III gave one interview after the sale was finalized. To a business reporter from the Providence Journal, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in 6 months. My son made a terrible mistake, he said, but I made mistakes too. I gave him everything except the one thing he needed: accountability. I taught him that money could solve problems. I never taught him that some problems money creates. The reporter asked if he blamed his son for the loss of the company. Preston III was quiet for a long moment. I blame myself, he said finally. Preston is my son. I raised him. Whatever he became, that's on me. He never spoke publicly about it again. Preston Montgomery IV was incarcerated at the Rhode Island Adult Correctional Institutions on November 1, 2024. At 9 a.m., he served his full sentence in general population. No special treatment, no early release. From what I heard through the system, and judges do hear things, Preston had a very difficult time adjusting to prison life. The arrogance that had defined him didn't last long when he was surrounded by people who didn't care about his last name or his family's money. He got into a fight his second week inside and ended up in solitary confinement for 30 days. After that, something changed. The reports said he became quieter, more withdrawn. He started attending the prison's educational programs. He volunteered for kitchen duty. He kept his head down and tried to survive. Whether this was genuine change or just survival instinct, I don't know. But he served 2.5 years of his 3-year sentence before being released in May of 2027 on mandatory supervised release, having earned some time off for good behavior in the final year. Marcus Thompson received his $750,000 in restitution in installments over the course of Preston's imprisonment. The first thing he did was pay off Angela's medical debt, all $127,000 of it. That weight, that burden he'd been carrying since her death, finally lifted. Then he paid off his own medical bills from the assault. Then he did something that surprised a lot of people. He didn't quit working. He took some time to heal, of course. His jaw needed months of physical therapy to function properly again. His ribs healed slowly, but once he was cleared by doctors, Marcus went back to work. Not as a valet, he'd had enough of that, but he got a job as a supervisor at a veterans support organization, helping other veterans transition to civilian life. He used some of the restitution money to buy a modest house in a good school district, a 3-bedroom place where Maya and Mia could each have their own room for the first time in their lives. He put money aside for their college education. He saved the rest. When I saw him about a year after the sentencing at a community event, Marcus looked different, healthier, more at peace. His daughters were with him, 2 beautiful little girls who looked so much like the photo he'd shown me of Angela. They were laughing, playing, acting like normal kids, and Marcus was smiling, really smiling, in a way that hadn't been possible when his face was broken. "How are you doing?" I asked him. "Better," he said. "We're doing better." He told me that Maya and Mia still asked about the trial sometimes, still wanted to understand what had happened. "I tell them the truth," Marcus said. "I tell them that a bad man hurt Daddy, but a good judge made sure that man faced consequences. I tell them that even when bad things happen, justice is possible. I tell them that we didn't take the money because some things, like dignity and truth, matter more than being rich." He paused. "They're proud of me, Judge Caprio. They tell their friends that their daddy is a hero because he stood up to a billionaire. I don't know if I'm a hero, but I know I did the right thing, and that's enough." I asked if Preston had tried to contact him. Marcus shook his head. "He wrote me a letter," he said, "about 6 months after he went to prison. It came through the court system so I'd know it was legitimate. I read it once. He looked at his daughters playing nearby. Preston apologized. He said he was sorry for everything, that he'd been a terrible person, that he understood why I didn't take the money, that he respected me for it. He said he deserved everything that happened to him and more. He said his father wouldn't speak to him anymore, and he understood that too. He said he was trying to become a better person, but he knew that didn't erase what he did." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He asked if someday, maybe years from now, I might be willing to forgive him. He knew he could never ask me to forget, but forgive. I asked what Marcus did with the letter. "I read it," Marcus said again, "and then I put it away. I haven't written back. I don't know if I ever will. Some wounds heal, but they leave scars, and I'm not sure I'm ready to tell him it's okay, because it's not okay. What he did to me, what he did to my daughters by hurting their father, what he did to his own father by destroying everything the man built, none of that is okay." He looked at me. "But I'm not carrying hatred anymore either, Judge. I don't wake up angry. I don't think about him every day. I'm focused on my girls, on my life, on moving forward. Maybe that's not forgiveness, but it's close enough for now." Preston Montgomery IV was released from prison in May 2027. He moved to a small apartment in Providence, far from the Newport estate where he'd grown up. His father had bought him the apartment but wouldn't see him. Preston got a job at a non-profit organization that helps formerly incarcerated people find employment and housing. From what I understand, he works there still, making less than $30,000 a year, a far cry from the life he once led. He completed his 1,000 hours of community service at the Veterans Homeless Shelter. The director of that shelter told me that Preston showed up every Saturday and Sunday for months, serving meals, cleaning, listening to veterans' stories. At first I thought it was just for show, the director said. Another rich kid doing court-ordered service and counting the hours until he's done. But he kept coming even after he'd finished his required hours. He kept showing up. He'd sit with the vets, ask about their lives, actually listen. One of our guys, a Vietnam vet who doesn't talk to anyone, opened up to Preston about his PTSD. Preston cried with him. The director shook his head. I don't know if he's changed permanently or if this is temporary, but right now, today, he's doing good work, and that's all I can judge him on. Preston wrote to Marcus one more time, 2 years after his first letter. This one was shorter. It said, Mr. Thompson, I don't expect you to respond to this. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I think about what I did every single day. I see your face, the way you looked when I was kicking you, and I hate myself for it. I've been working with homeless veterans, hearing their stories, understanding what service means, understanding what you sacrificed for this country, and then what I did to you when you were just trying to support your family. There's no excuse. There never will be. I'm trying to be better. I don't know if I'll ever succeed, but I'm trying. I hope you and your daughters are well. I hope you're happy. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. I'm sorry. Preston Montgomery IV. Marcus never responded to that letter either, but he kept it. He told me why when I asked. I keep it because my daughters might want to read it someday, he said. When they're older, when they can understand complicated things like redemption and forgiveness and justice, they'll want to know what happened to the man who hurt their father. And I want them to see that even people who do terrible things can try to change. I don't know if Preston has really changed, but I want Maya and Mia to believe that change is possible, because if it's not, what's the point of any of this? Preston Montgomery IV walked into my courtroom thinking his money made him untouchable. He walked out in handcuffs, crying, begging his father to save him. His father couldn't. I did what money couldn't buy. I delivered justice. If this video moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who's lost faith that the system works. What happened in that courtroom on that October morning wasn't just about Preston Montgomery IV going to prison. It wasn't just about Marcus Thompson getting justice, though that was critically important. It was about something bigger. It was about the principle that in a courtroom, under the law, we are all equal. Your bank account doesn't matter. Your family name doesn't matter. Your connections, your donations, your breakfast meetings with presidents, none of it matters when you're standing before a judge who's sworn to uphold justice. Preston Montgomery IV called me nothing because in his world I was nothing. A traffic court judge in Providence, Rhode Island. What did that matter to someone whose family controlled billions of dollars? But he was wrong. Dead wrong. Because in that courtroom I wasn't nothing, I was the law. And the law doesn't care how much money you have. I've been asked many times since that sentencing if I was too harsh. If 3 years in prison, the maximum sentence, was excessive for a first-time violent offender. If triggering the corporate charter clause that destroyed the Montgomery family business was fair when Preston III hadn't done anything wrong himself. My answer is always the same. Preston Montgomery IV had every opportunity to avoid this outcome. He could have not beaten Marcus Thompson in the first place. He could have shown remorse after the assault. He could have accepted responsibility. He could have apologized sincerely instead of trying to buy Marcus's silence. He could have shown respect during the trial. He could have treated Marcus's testimony with the gravity it deserved. And most importantly, he could have shown this court the respect it was owed instead of calling me nothing and suggesting that his family's money put him above the law. At every single turn, Preston chose arrogance over humility, contempt over respect, and entitlement over accountability. Those were his choices. The consequences were mine to deliver. As for Preston Montgomery III losing his company, That wasn't my doing. That was the result of a clause his own father, Preston Montgomery II, had agreed to back in 1995 when investors demanded protections against family scandal. That clause existed for a reason: to ensure that the Montgomery Hotel Group couldn't be destroyed by the reckless actions of family members. Ironically, that safeguard designed to protect the company ended up being its undoing. But that's not on me. That's on Preston IV for committing the felony that triggered it, and perhaps on Preston III for not teaching his son the values that might have prevented it. Every parent wants to give their children a better life than they had. Preston III certainly did that financially, but somewhere along the way, he forgot to teach his son that character matters more than wealth, that how you treat people defines you, that privilege comes with responsibility. Preston IV grew up believing his money made him superior to others. He learned that lesson from somewhere. And while I have sympathy for a father watching his life's work crumble because of his son's actions, I cannot and will not let that sympathy override the need for justice. Marcus Thompson served his country with honor. He lost his wife to cancer. He worked himself to exhaustion to provide for his daughters. And Preston Montgomery IV beat him, called him worthless, and then mocked him in court for being emotional about it. If I had given Preston a lighter sentence, if I had looked the other way when he called me nothing, if I had let his money buy him out of consequences, what message would that have sent? It would have told Marcus that his service didn't matter, that his dignity didn't matter, that he should have just taken the money because that's how the world really works. It would have told every person in this state who works hard for little pay that they're worth less than the wealthy people they serve. It would have told every veteran who struggled to transition to civilian life that their sacrifice means nothing when faced with money and power. And I refuse to send that message. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about affirmation. It's about standing up and saying loudly that every person has value, that every person deserves dignity, that no amount of money gives you the right to treat others as less than human. Marcus Thompson is worth more than Preston Montgomery IV, not because of his bank account, but because of his character, his service, his sacrifice, his integrity, and my job was to make sure the law reflected that truth. Some people watching this will think I was too harsh. They'll say Preston was young, that he deserved a second chance, that destroying his family's legacy was disproportionate to his crime. To those people I say Preston had countless second chances before he ever entered my courtroom. Every time his father's money bailed him out of consequences, that was a second chance. And he learned nothing from any of them. He learned that money solves problems, that lawyers make charges disappear, that the rules don't apply to people like him. The only way to break that pattern was to deliver consequences so severe that even money couldn't fix them. 3 years in prison meant Preston couldn't avoid facing what he'd done. The loss of his family's company meant his father couldn't enable him anymore. The public apology requirement meant he had to acknowledge his actions in front of the entire state. The community service at the veterans' shelter meant he had to look veterans in the eye and understand what he'd done to Marcus. Those weren't punishments for the sake of punishment. Those were teaching moments, painful ones, but necessary. And based on what I've heard about Preston's life since his release, maybe, just maybe, he finally learned something. Maybe watching his father lose everything taught him what his father's money never could. That actions have consequences, that other people matter, that redemption requires genuine change. I don't know if Preston Montgomery IV is truly a different person now. I don't know if his work at that nonprofit is genuine or performative. I don't know if he'll spend the rest of his life trying to make amends or if he'll eventually slip back into entitlement once the memory of prison fades. But I know this. He will never forget what happened in my courtroom. He will never forget the moment I read that corporate charter clause and he realized he'd destroyed his father's legacy. He will never forget the look on his father's face when he shook his head and walked away. Those moments are seared into his memory forever. And if nothing else, that awareness might make him think twice before he ever treats another human being as worthless again. To everyone watching this, I want you to understand what this case represents. This isn't just a story about a billionaire's son learning a hard lesson. It's a story about the fundamental promise of our justice system that we are all equal under the law. It doesn't always work that way. We all know that. Wealthy people can afford better lawyers. They can post bail more easily. They can drag out cases with motions and appeals. They can use their influence to pressure prosecutors and judges. The system isn't perfect, and it often favors those with resources. But in my courtroom, I do everything in my power to make sure that promise of equality is real. When Preston Montgomery IV stood before me, he wasn't a billionaire's heir. He was a defendant who had committed a violent assault, tried to cover it up, and showed no remorse. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a valet. He was a veteran, a father, a man of integrity who refused to let money silence him. And my job was to see them both clearly, without the distortion of wealth and power, and deliver justice accordingly. That's what I did. That's what I'll continue to do for as long as I sit on this bench. Because if judges don't stand up to power, if we let money and influence override justice, then this whole system falls apart. Then the courtroom really does become nothing, and I refuse to let that happen. Preston Montgomery III built an empire over 35 years. Preston Montgomery IV destroyed it in one night. The sentence I delivered didn't just punish the son, it ended a legacy. And while there's tragedy in that, while I do feel for a father who lost everything because of his son's actions, I don't regret my decision, because on the other side of that ledger is Marcus Thompson and his daughters, who learned that justice is possible even when you're facing a billionaire, who learned that dignity cannot be bought, who learned that standing up for what's right, even when it costs you, is worth more than any amount of money. If the price of teaching that lesson was the end of the Montgomery Hotel Group, then so be it. Some things matter more than business empires. Justice is one of them. Let this case be a lesson to everyone, whether you're wealthy or struggling, powerful or powerless. In this courtroom, you are judged by your actions, not your bank account, not your family name, not your connections or your donations or your position in society. Your actions, and if your actions involve beating a veteran, calling him worthless, trying to buy his silence, and then mocking the judge who's trying to deliver justice, you will face the full consequences that the law allows. No exceptions, no special treatment, no mercy. Preston Montgomery IV learned that lesson the hard way. I hope others learn it by watching what happened to him. This is a dramatization for storytelling and educational purposes. It is not legal advice, not based on a real case, and is not intended as factual reporting.